go to Cheryl, work things out, and we came up with this amazing bill that protects the children in the school, protects families, protects the parents. The thing I love about the language in this bill is that it talks about that the schools cannot violate the students' religious beliefs or rights of conscience or the students' parents. That's the best thing about it, the student or the parents. And then it goes through, you'll have to look it up. We don't have time to go through everything today. You can see I've got it up there behind me, some of the things that they talk about. But it has to do with activities and curriculum, books, anything that violates the religious belief or the conscience of the student or the student's parents. Great piece of legislation, and what a difference it makes to the schools in Utah, to the parents in their schools in Utah. It's just that the parents have to know about it. And that's your responsibility. Go out and tell the parents. We can pass all the kinds of wonderful bills in the world, but the parents have to be the watchdog because the schools try to get around it. Sometimes it's the school boards that try to get around it. And all of you have to be the watchdogs and teach the parents, teach your children and your grandchildren and everybody how to be watchdogs. And the second bill that I absolutely love is individual freedom in public education. And that one is, the sponsor of that is Tim Jimenez. Tim, or is he in here? I can't see him. Right when I was going to tell Tim to stand up and talk about his bill, he did what I said not to do. He stayed out in the hall. So, oh, now he comes back. Well, he is standing up. There he is back there. Come and sit down, Tim. Anyway, and we have to thank Christina Bogus because she tugged at him, and they worked on this together and passed this amazing bill. And the bottom line on this bill is it's an anti-CTR bill. CRT bill. Yeah, I said this. See, so and that's and I'm looking at it right there. Anyway, this bill opposes the CRT agenda in the schools, and the language is terrific. If you can see all the things there that the local school boards can't do, have to do, should do, I was just amazed. And through the process, they made a couple of little amendments. Tim is such a purist; he was going to abandon his bill. He said, "I'm not. If they're going to do that, I'm not." I said, Tim. This bill is amazing. We'll fix those later. I mean, there's sometimes you can do a little bit of amendment and get a good bill passed, and sometimes they want too much, and you have to say, nope, not going to do it. And I just appreciate him and the great things that he did with this bill. Another bill, and over here we have Mike Peterson. So Mike, stand up so everybody can see you. This is Representative Mike Peterson. And this bill was called Unprofessional Conduct Amendments, and this had to do with conversion therapy because we had a terrible rule, a Doppel rule about conversion therapy. And this rule was so bad that therapists, good family therapists that were counseling children put a sign on their door, no one under 18, because they would lose their license. They'd lose their license if they tried to counsel young people that were struggling with gender confusion, whatever it was you want to call it, and they didn't dare talk to them and even try to say, well, let's talk about this. Are you sure? Just a conversation that a therapist would have. They couldn't do it. They could lose their license. And so we don't have time to read all the language in this bill, and it's got some complicated language, but what was important was the end result, and the end result was those therapists are all back in business now, and we need those therapists working with these young people. So thank you to Mike. Now we're going to talk about things that we're going to do this year, and one of the bills that we have is going to be a bill that has to do with food. And you're going to hear from Senator Winterton about that bill, but I just wanted to bring it up just to give you a little bit before you hear from him about this. It all has to do with local food. And what is local food? Well, local food is means that an agricultural product or livestock that is produced, processed, and distributed for sale or consumption within the state and sold to an end consumer within the state. And Ron will explain more to you about that, but that is important. I don't know how many of you realize, in the dangerous world we live in right now, and how our food supply is at risk. And it's at risk because of the federal government. It's at risk because of the FDA and others that want to tell us what we can do. And if you talk to ranchers, they'll tell you their horror stories, those raising cattle, and you've watched the prices go up in the stores and the prices of meat skyrocketing because they can't even get their cows, their cattle to market. And when they do get them to market, sometimes they have to wait like 18 months. That means they got to keep feeding these animals. Many of them have just given up parts of their herds because of that. And we're seeing all of our food being threatened like that. As I've talked to people and they say, what are you working on this year? And I give them a list of the things we're working on. When I mention food, that is the number one bill that they're excited about. It's always when I say food, thank goodness, we're going to do something about food. People know. They've seen what happened in the store. They saw what happened during COVID. They watched how they can regulate everything you do. And so this bill will actually do all kinds of things to protect you by allowing these things to happen here just in the state and not outside of the state. So anyway, it's a great bill. Ron will talk more about it because he's the sponsor. And we'll get this bill passed this year with your help. Then you heard, of course, Phil Lyman talking today, Representative Lyman. And I just wanted to put up there for you the definitions that he was talking about. In his bill, it defines female and male. Craziness, isn't it, that you have to define it. This bill will say female means a person belonging at birth to the biological sex which has a specific reproductive role of producing eggs. And male means a person belonging at birth to the biological sex, which has a specific reproductive role of producing sperm. Now you say, wow, what do you have to go through all that? We used to just say, biological birth, but that wasn't enough. They have ways to get around that. They get around everything. So you have to get more and more specific. So it also says in the bill that sex means the classification of a person either as female or male based on the organization of the body of such persons for a specific reproductive role as indicated by the person's sex chromosomes, naturally occurring sex hormones, and internal and external genital presence at birth. All of those are in there, so that we can say, what is a woman? And that, I can't tell you how important it is. If you've ever had the experience of being in a restroom with a man, as I had just this year at the legislature, and suddenly realized that this person in the stall next to me was a man, I was grateful that something had happened earlier in the day that gave me the knowledge that I needed to know that that was a man in there so I could stay put till I heard that man leave. It's unnerving. And women don't like that. We don't want that. And so it's taking something like this. So we appreciate what Phil is doing and what Kara is doing, Kara Birkeland, as we work towards getting that bill passed. Now I want to talk about vaping. That's something we worked on for years. We worked with other organizations on that, the American Heart Association, Drug Safe Utah, which I'm a part of. I want to thank Walt Plum over here. Walt he's fierce on this issue. Walt lives to save children. I mean, he's the most amazing man. Stand up, Walt, just so I can tell her. Here, this is my friend, and he doesn't like attention. Now, I will tell you, he manages to get attention when he's at the legislature because he's a bulldog. And don't ever think that this man compromises. Yeah, he doesn't. It's wonderful. I love just standing next to him and watching people think, oh my gosh. I wish I could tell you some of the stories, but I won't. But it's great. And this is a big issue to Walt as he's there to protect children that has to do with vaping. Because how many of you in this room have heard in the past that vaping is a way to stop smoking? like, it's not dangerous. Vaping's an okay thing. So here, let's tell them to vape. We're talking about children, and as it says here, it is a well established that e-cigarettes are not safe for kids. Their use poses a significant and unavoidable health risk to young people in the United States. And then and it goes on to talk about some of these risks, and some of them are addiction, harm to the brain development, harm to respiratory health. I have been traveling because of having a very sick daughter, and so I just flew in yesterday, came right here to the hotel, then I'm here today. I didn't get a chance to go home, and I haven't for a while, because I wanted to bring today with you, I have a little vape cartridge that I carry around. I use it when I speak on this issue, or mostly when I testify to legislature. And these little cartridges are about this, they put it next to a quarter, and they're about the size of a quarter but narrower. And that's the cartridge. That's where the children are getting their vaping. They just put it in their pocket. They can vape at school. They can vape anywhere. And this has got to stop. And what we do is it targets the youth, because they flavor these vapes, and they flavor them in flavors that appeal to young people. So these flavors lure the young people into using e-cigarettes. And there's a lot of numbers here that we can talk about, but what you need to know that greater than 90% of all kids start with flavored tobacco products. That's how they get them. And flavor makes the vape juices more toxic and damaging to the lungs. And the chemicals used to flavor e-cigarettes contain harmful toxins. And yet, because they can carry these little cartridges around in their pockets, we have an epidemic that you can't even believe. And we've got to pass legislation that will stop this, because the teens are more likely to develop a lifetime addiction with flavored vapes. And so what we need to do is pass legislation that just outlaws flavored vapes, because they're just for children. Adults don't care about these bubblegum flavors and the flavors that they have. And they saying, well, we'll just sell them in vape stores. Well, what does that mean? That just means the kids will go there to get their vapes instead of the convenience stores. So it's really important. We're going to be working on a bill this year, because I would appreciate if all of you would look into this. Just Google this and find out the danger and what it's doing to the lungs of these children. And in fact, children are dying. We saw that happen with children that were vaping marijuana, and how tragic that was. If you've ever had a child that has lung problems, and we had one with lung problems from pneumonia, it's a terrible thing, and they suffer, and it's a lot of things they aren't able to do in their lives. So please be involved in that. Now, I'm also going to talk about one other thing that I know is going to come up again this year. I've, again, been busy and haven't had time to really look up the bills or what bills we have. But every year, just about every year, we have some kind of bill that has to do with an Article 5 convention. And I talked about this last year, but I'm just going to briefly go over it this year. And each of you know that how Eagle Forum feels about this nationally. National Eagle Forum, of course, Utah Eagle Forum, and other organizations, lots of other organizations we work with across the nation. The people out there seem to be against having an Article 5 convention, but it always appears because so many legislators are for it. But why don't we want to have an Article 5 convention? Because Article 5 is in the Constitution, and we know it's there, and we know the day could come when they could use it. I think that most of our disagreements have to do with not necessarily whether we'll ever have an Article 5 convention, because how can you say that? How do you know that? We don't know what the future brings, and we believe in inspiration, but we do know that now is not the time. And that's really what the issue is what is the timing on this? And I think that's where our disagreements are with our friends that feel the other way. But, Glenn Beck for about 10 years was a big supporter of an Article 5 convention. And then he changed his mind. And last year he made an announcement. And I'm going to read and have you read along here with what Glenn said. This is what he said on his radio show the day he announced that he had changed his position on an Article 5 convention. He says, I've been a supporter of an Article 5 convention of states. I have been a pretty big supporter, a vocal supporter. I am reversing that today because after some real thought and prayer, We are not the people to open up this sacred document. We are not the people. That was a God-inspired document that was divinely written. You can read that from, I don't know how many founders. The very hand of God was involved. Benjamin Franklin even said the very hand of God was involved in writing that document. Do you believe that we could send that kind of delegate today? Someone who, when they got to an impasse, someone like Ben Franklin that would say, let's pause and go to church and pray. They did not politic, they prayed. I am not for opening up the Constitution anymore because we are not that people anymore. When we are that people, I will be for it again. When we have demonstrated our humility and our obedience to God, and I am afraid it's going to take a massive beat down of our country to get to that place, then I'll be for it again. Someday we will be humble enough. We will recognize God, but someday we will not be an enemy to God. We will not be so arrogant. When we are those people, I will support the Convention of States. But I withdraw my support, and I am sorry to say that. It is because of that fact that this Constitution is wholly inadequate for anyone other than a religious and moral people. We are not those people, and we should not stain this document. And that's how I feel. That's where I've always been on this. Another person who said almost the same thing was Cleon Skousen. Clear back in 1994, Cleon wrote a letter to Phyllis Schlafly stating, starting with, Dearest Phyllis. That letter included the following paragraph. In all these years, because Cleon used to be, just like Glenn, Cleon used to be for an Article 5 convention. In all these years, you and I have only divided on one issue, and as time passed, my feeling is that while I was right on the abstract constitutional principle, you were undoubtedly right in sensing a great danger if we tried to apply Article 5 of the Constitution during the period of the most deprived political corruption in the entire history of our country. Now, remember, he said that in 1994. Where are we today? And that's where I'm bringing this up again, because every year we deal with this. One thing that we always hear, proponents try to dismiss our concerns by assuring us that anything that comes out of the convention must be ratified by 3/4 of the states, and that is true. But what we don't talk about is that 3/4 of the states, which is 38 states, but it only takes 50% plus one of the delegates to a convention, or of the legislators, 50% plus one of the legislators to vote to make it, their state, like Utah, one of those 38 states. And I can tell you there are all kinds of things. Let's look at some of these things. If they were to have a COS, there's one of their bills that's calling for an Article 5 convention, is one of the things that says limit the powers and jurisdiction of the federal government. Of course, I've always thought that's what the Constitution was supposed to do. But in this bill that is passing across the nation, this is one of the things they say. Well, what does that mean? People on both sides of this issue will have definitions of that. And what about things like marriage equality? Doesn't that sound like something important that people will vote for? I can guarantee, I really think that right now in the legislature here in the state of Utah, they could get 50% to support marriage equality. Everybody says, oh, I guess it's okay. How many people do you know that used to be so against gay marriage that now says, I don't see a problem with that? How about putting that in the Constitution? Or what about abortion? We watched what's happened in other states like Kansas and others where we never thought there would be a public vote in favor of abortion. Could they not pass a constitutional amendment for abortion? I think they could. I think they could get the 50% in the states that they need. Again, keeping back and remembering 50%. And what about the Second Amendment? I think they wouldn't have any problem getting rid of what they call assault weapons. That everybody's thinking the big, assault weapon. We will vote to get rid of assault weapons. But what is the definition of an assault weapon? Most people say anything that you can use a weapon to assault somebody with is an assault weapon. So are these things that we would ever think could happen? And yet I can tell you it will happen. A lot of people say, well, I think there'd be more Republicans there than Democrats, so we'll be okay. Well, even if there are more Republicans there than Democrats, will they all be the kind of Republicans that we see in this room today? I've gone to the National Republican Convention, and I wondered where I was. One time I said that out loud when I was on the platform committee, when I was listening to the discussions, and that year the Democrats were in Boston. And I said out loud for everybody to hear, did I make a wrong turn? Am I in Boston? Because that's what was going on at the Republican convention. What happens when you have a convention with Republicans and Democrats to talk about these things? One of the movements right now, very strong movements, is to aggregate all of the calls that they've had since the beginning of our country. And when you look at that, these are the ones, it's right in legislation. They put these calls in legislation saying, here's the calls. We're going to aggregate all these calls, and by doing that, we already have enough to call a convention. And they're calling upon Congress to call that convention because they aggregated things like the Bill of Rights, two of the Bill of Rights ones, one from 1788 and 1789. Well, the Bill of Rights is already in the Constitution. Is it honest to say we're going to add that to the call for a new Constitution convention? Or what about slavery? Well, we took care of that, but yet they're going to aggregate that one. And what about the direct election of states? There are 7 states that have the direct election of states as a call from back to 1901 to 1907, that they want to add those and aggregate those. So, and then polygamy, it goes on of all these things that they want to aggregate. Remember, those first ones, we only had 13 states. And we're going to throw those in to a country now of 50 states. And so how could these be valid when their subject is already a constitutional amendment? And then many of these have been rescinded. So if you look at how many rescinded, if you take away all these that are already in the Constitution, if you take away the ones that have been rescinded, they aren't anywhere near close. But should they be able to aggregate old calls that have long passed? The aggregation strategy of Article 5 convention advocates is a treacherous way to bypass their own failure to achieve consensus in enough states for Congress to call an Article 5 convention. Instead, they create a counterfeit consensus through aggregation. Think of the amendments that could be proposed when the application for a convention is as broad and vague as this. We were originally told it had to be just one subject. Every state had to pass. The very same people that are promoting this said one subject, and every call had to be exactly the same. Mark Meckler was here in the state of Utah and testified to that in a committee in Utah. And that committee, you can look it up right now, and you can hear him say that. And yet these are the very people now saying, let's put them all together. Let's just have one big party. Bring them all together, and we can do this. And another one that comes up a lot in the state of Utah, and I really don't know why, is the idea of term limits. First of all, they don't want a term limit. The legislature doesn't want a term limit themselves, so why would they want a term limit Congress? And you can see there these numbers that for the House, the average years in there are there are 9.1 years in Congress and 10.2 years in the Senate. But we already have a call in the state of Utah for a balanced budget amendment. So I don't know why it keeps coming up over and over